In the dark between worlds, where even the gods lose their names, a single ember flickers against the cold. It drifts alone through a void that should not exist, a place without fire, without time, without death. Then the void tears open. A wound splits reality like a cracked shell, and through it falls a figure made not of flesh alone, but of ash, memory, and the stubborn will to rise again. The Ashen One is dragged from the quiet ruin of his old world and hurled into a galaxy where war has no end, where faith is a weapon, and where the very air trembles under the weight of countless dying suns. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. He falls without sensation, without breath, without the familiar pull of bonfires that once anchored his existence. Instead, he feels something else reaching for him, something vast and starving. The warp senses him as he descends, brushing against his ash soul with curiosity and hunger. It has tasted many spirits across the ages, but never one like this, an ember that refuses to go out, a spark that rebuilds itself no matter how many times it is snuffed. And then he strikes the ground. The impact sends dust and metal shrapnel outward in a silent ring, as though reality itself is trying to absorb what has been forced upon it. The world he has landed in is not a land of castles and fading flame, but an endless machine of empire and death. Smoke chokes the sky, towers scrape the heavens like rusted spears, and millions toil in layers of forgotten cities stacked beneath their own ruins. In that first still moment, as ash settles and the world breathes around him, the Ashen One senses the truth of this place. War is constant, hope is rare, gods are real and they are hungry. His ember burns faintly against this new darkness, yet he can feel it responding, adjusting, preparing. For the first time since the first flame began its long decline, he stands in a universe where he is not the last light struggling against inevitable dark. Here he is an intruder, a variable, a bonfire that should not exist. And somewhere in the warp, something notices him and turns its gaze. Thus begins the story of the Ashen One in the 41st Millennium, a lost ember carried into a realm of endless war, where even a fading flame can become a weapon capable of burning the Imperium itself. The Ashen One awakens lying on fractured metal, his body half buried in dust and broken machinery. The world around him is a maze of collapsed gantries, rusted pipelines, and shattered walkways suspended over an abyss that breathes with toxic fog. Above him, far beyond the suffocating haze, faint lights drift like dying stars, orbital platforms cutting across a sky blackened by centuries of smoke. He rises slowly, ash drifting from his cloak with every motion, and reaches instinctively for a bonfire that is no longer there. The familiar warmth, the quiet pull of flame that once called him back from death, has gone silent. In its place he feels a harsh, metallic cold seeping through the air, a mechanical chill carried by engines and furnaces older than memory. It is a cold that does not belong to winter or shadow, but to industry, war, and exhaustion. When he breathes, the taste is wrong. There is no ember, no incense, no burning age to the air. Instead, he tastes iron, oil, chemical waste, and the faint residue of burnt ozone. Each breath scrapes his throat like he is inhaling the shards of broken swords. The air of this place is not meant for living things. It is meant for machines, for servitors, for bodies that have forgotten how to die. He steadies himself and looks around. The underhive sprawls in every direction, a labyrinth of rusted supports and skeletal towers, all built upon older ruins swallowed by time. Nothing here is built to last, yet everything endures through sheer, brutal necessity. Flickering lights buzz overhead, fighting against the darkness with less strength than a fading bonfire. The Ashen One reaches inward for the first flame's guidance, for the ember that once defined him. It responds, but faintly, as though smothered beneath mountains of ash. In his old world, the flame weakened with age. Here, something else suppresses it, a pressure not physical but spiritual, an oppressive weight pushing down on his very essence. He senses it everywhere, a force woven into the planet itself, a force made of belief, agony, duty, and sacrifice. It feels nothing like the linking of fires or the fading of kingdoms. It is harsher, more absolute, a faith enforced by iron and blood. As he tries to orient himself, he hears the distant echo of machinery, miles of gears turning above and below, the heartbeat of a civilization that survives only by consuming itself. The sound replaces the crackle of flame he once relied upon, reminding him that he has crossed into a realm shaped not by ancient gods of fire, but by engines of war. His ember flickers in answer, uncertain but unbroken. He came from a world forged by flame. He has arrived in a world forged by machines. And the two do not yet understand each other. The transition from one to the other is not seamless, but it is inevitable, and the Ashen One senses that his muted fire will either adapt to this grim machine realm or be extinguished by it. The first thing he notices is not sight or sound, but pressure, like the weight of a thought pressing against his skull. It is the warp reaching out in slow, probing hands, testing the edges of whatever it has found. Where the Ashen One once read the world through the steady rhythm of bonfire embers, here the world reads him back with a feverish intensity. The Imperium is not a distant myth, but a living weather system, and its storms fold over this planet like winter clouds made of will and worship. He walks and the air around him hums with a strange music that is almost industrial. The prayers of a billion souls thread through the hive like gears, and those prayers have teeth. Work hymns, litanies to saints and emperors, frantic curses and whispered bargains, all of it blends into a single machine song that powers factories and feeds gods. The sound of faith here is an engine, and it drives more than devotion. It fuels icons, girders, and the rituals that tear holes between realities. The Ashen One feels this, and he understands that in this universe belief itself is an energy source as real as coal or blood. This place makes different demands. In his old world, despair and hope danced around the dying flame. The bonfire accepted sacrifices in flesh and memory and returned warmth. Here, sacrifices are ledger entries and liturgies, and the warp turns them into hunger. The Ashen One senses whispers of gods who are less like patrons and more like furnaces, constantly fed by battle and worship. They do not sleep. They do not rest. They are engines hungry for motion. As he moves through the underhive, occasional ripples cross his awareness, small distortions where reality stumbles. Shadows behave oddly near certain altars and graffiti that looks like mathematics spiraling toward a point of rupture. The faint smell of ozone lingers where the warp leaks, and sometimes he hears the distant, brittle laughter of entities that are not human. He feels no dread as a reflex. Rather, there is a professional curiosity, a hunger for information. His long life has taught him to catalog dangers and name apocalypses. This one is complicated. His ember is different here, too. Where fire used to be an anchor, now it feels like a currency, a signal under the microscope of something vast. When he reaches, the ember answers, but with a change. It resonates against the warp's pressure instead of aligning with it. It hums in counterpoint. That counterpoint is an odd immunity, a mismatch that makes the Ashen One less readable to the Imperium's hunger. The warp notices the mismatch and lingers with a puzzled interest. Predators are curious about other predators, and gods do not easily forget anomalies. He tests the sensation, letting the ash at his fingers flare into a tiny hunger sphere, a personal bonfire that does not consume the world but tastes it. The ember pulls at passing scraps of feeling, at trailing memories left behind by the dead in the underhive. A whisper, a fragment of laughter, a soldier's last hope. The ash gathers them and folds them into silence. The act is quiet, private, and it leaves him with a richer ballast of experience, as if he had just taken a single, vital sip from a river of lives. Nearby, someone prays with a ferocity born from terror rather than faith. The Ashen One feels the prayer as a sharp, bright thing, too bright for the warp's hunger to digest directly. It is a different energy than the consumptive force of worship the planet feeds upon. Here is a contradiction: belief that seeks salvation instead of feeding destruction. The ember registers that discrepancy like a new flavor, and the Ashen One recognizes an opportunity. In a world where worship fuels gods, perhaps a different kind of consuming might starve those gods instead. He has been many things and he has adapted to worse. But this place is a different kind of danger. It does not simply seek to tear him apart. It wants to catalog him, to label him, to turn his anomaly into an asset or an experiment or a tool. The Ashen One feels that force pushing at the edges of his mind like a surveyor's stake. He answers not with words, but with movement. He steps down deeper into the underhive, and the warp's attention follows like a moth circling a stubborn lamp. This is the first true lesson of the 41st millennium. The gods here do not hide. They harvest. They are patient and cruel and mechanized, and they will not let a strange ember exist without first deciding what sort of hunger it belongs to. He has hardly taken a step when the world answers in its most immediate way, with fear. A scrawny figure emerges from the shadow of a collapsed scaffolding, face painted with the sickly colors of scavengers and the paranoid eyes of someone who has learned to expect monsters in every corner. The man screams a word that means traitor and refugee and demon all at once. His hands fumble with a crude weapon, a stub gun welded from salvaged pipes and prayer offerings. The gun smells of oil and old vows. The scavenger shoots before he understands what he sees. The round rips through ash and coat and finds the Ashen One just below the shoulder. There is an ugly sound when the shell punches through, like the tearing of a flag. For a heartbeat, the Ashen One feels the absence of something, a familiar weakness that used to follow death and rebirth. But then the ash knits itself, fibers pulling together like the grafting of a new seam. Flesh reforms, the wound seals, and the blood that spilled seems to remember being whole and flows back into the body, as if reversed time prefers a second chance. The scavenger's pistol clicks empty. He stares as if he saw a god blink, and then he runs, feet slapping metal, breath a ragged prayer that dissolves into the hive's noise. His fear ripples out, and the underhive answers. Men and women who had been doing the everyday work of survival stop and look. The echo of violence draws attention faster here than in any other world the Ashen One has known. Where his presence might once have been a curiosity, now it is a rumor that takes form. Guns come from above then, trained, steady, the kind that belong to people who have been taught to kill on command. A squad of Imperial Guard, green armor scuffed by years of service to an indifferent empire, descend into the corridor with bayonets fixed and vox chips alive. The officer barks a code more ritual than language. He orders the stranger to show himself, to identify, to submit. The Ashen One raises his hands in a slow, unconcerned gesture that annoys the tactical reflexes of soldiers taught to expect immediate aggression. Discipline matters here. The guards' weapons are precise, their doctrine brutal. Disable first, learn later. They do not panic. They do not shout of gods or destinies. They move to secure and to question. The Ashen One watches the way their equipment catches the light and the way their eyes move behind gas masks that have forgotten smiles. These are trained killers who are not here for martyrdom. They are here to hold a line long enough for someone to decide what to do with the anomaly. And then the sound of engines changes everything. A deep, resonant tone vibrates the metal underfoot. Power armor hits the corridor like stormfront boots. Space Marines have arrived, and the world narrows to their silhouette. Their armor is not merely protection, it is doctrine made solid. Skulls and purity seals cling to lacquered ceramite like talismans. They do not ask for identification. They growl a single order through their vox: subject neutralize or subject contain. Their voices lack inflection. They have been taught to be the blunt instrument of an ancient will. The bolters open up as if exhaling thunder. The rounds are less bullets than small, moral judgments, explosives designed to unmake bodies that embody threat. The corridor lights flare as the blast passes through, sweat and grime suspended in the air like the remnants of offerings. The Ashen One stands where he is and lets the fire rush over him. It eats through coat and flesh in a carnivorous rush, but the ash returns, spooling itself back together with grim efficiency. The soldiers on the ground see him fall and rise, and for a moment they see a mirror of their own endurance. To them, he is both enemy and wonder. To him, they are a new test, a system to be observed. He does not roar or rage. He catalogues. The stub gun, the guardsmen, the bolters, each is a fact. Each is a measure of how this universe defends itself. When the firefight ends, and it always ends quickly around trained units, the Ashen One remains standing. The scavenger is gone. The soldiers lower their weapons with the cautious respect bred into them by countless campaigns. Their eyes do not soften. They assess, report, record. The word they choose for him is an old one masked in new syllables: anomaly. The Ashen One hears the label and finds it fit. He is foreign to this place, but he is not powerless in it. That first gunshot taught him two things: that this world will test him with steel, and that he will answer. And that tests in the 41st millennium are seldom innocent. They bring the war to him, and they do it without hesitation. The Space Marines step from the shadows like statues that have learned to move. Their armor is a temple, and each plate is an argument about who has the right to live. These are not merely soldiers. They are apex predators forged by gene craft and ritual, each of them a piece of an order older than the Ashen One's memory. They do not seek conversation. Their arrival is language enough. The bolters speak first. Each shot is a thunderclap, a small crisis that tears air into fire and metal. The sound is older than most wars, a mechanical liturgy that the Ashen One recognizes as a test of scale. He stands in the blast and lets it tear through him. The rounds find flesh, rend muscle, snap bone. For a moment the fall feels permanent, but permanence is not the Ash's condition. He has tasted endings and returned from them. Flesh knots itself around empty space and fills the gap like a craftsman repairing a well-worn tool. The Space Marines do not falter when the enemy refuses to die. They tighten the line and then advance, disciplined and terrible. Their tactics are carved from billions of hours of battle. They flank, they pin, they coordinate like a living machine. Among them moves a captain, helmeted and silent, whose posture speaks of a dozen suns shed in service. He calculates angles and risk with the same cold efficiency with which the Ashen One catalogues threats, two different kinds of excellence colliding. Combat is not simply a test of durability here. It is a conversation about purpose and craft. The Ashen One uses movement as him, letting his shadow flicker in and out of solidity. Where weapons cannot find purchase, he slips. Where armor claims advantage, he strikes. He pulls ancient techniques from the marrow of his memory, swordplay and footwork learned in fires that taught patience, not merely rage. His weapons sing back to life with smoke and ash, tools refashioned into something that can cut through the particular brutality of ceramite. There is a terrible balance struck between the two. Bolter rounds explode and scatter like falling suns. Power fists swing with the weight of mountains. The Ashen One's blade becomes rhythm against ceramite, and his shadow plays a partner to his hands. He moves like someone who has been 100 places and tasted 1,000 deaths. The Space Marines move like gods who have been trained to win. Neither yields easily. The exchange reveals new facts. The Ashen One learns that ceramite can tear and can be torn when struck with enough finesse at the right moment. The Space Marines learn that their sacred rounds do not end everything. For every bolt that scours him, ashes knit and a new plan forms. For every blow that would sunder, the Ashen One parries and reads the pattern of the monstrous warriors confronting him. This is not a duel of equals. It is a study of adaptation. The Marines have numbers, doctrine, and the Emperor's bred resolve. The Ashen One has improvisation, hunger, and a history of finding meaning in the flameless gray between endings. Each time their attacks meet and separate, the corridor takes on the look of an arena where something older than either side watches for a verdict. When the last bolter round goes spent and the last power weapon finds only empty air as its target, silence returns like a held breath. The Marines stand with their ritual calm, and the Ashen One straightens his shoulders and tests a wound with a finger. Neither side smiles. Respect here is a strategic commodity, not a sentiment. They mark the stranger as dangerous, and he marks them the same. What the Space Marines cannot yet decide is whether he is a foe to be destroyed or a force to be turned into an asset. What the Ashen One does know is simpler. He has passed the first act of their test. He is still whole. He is still here. And in a universe where war is a religion, endurance is power. After the fight, deliberation overrides immediate violence. The Inquisition moves through the fortress like a syringe through shrouded machinery, precise and clinical. Their arrival is quieter than the Space Marines, but perhaps more dangerous, because they come with questions instead of bolts. An Inquisitor steps forward, a figure whose authority threads together faith, law, and a ruthless pragmatism that can turn loyalty into compulsion. She wears armor that is less about protection and more about proclamation, robes layered beneath pauldrons, a ceremonial god sigil worked into a gauntlet. Her gaze is colder than the engines singing overhead. She does not shout or post ultimatums. Her questions are surgical, designed to probe not only the surface facts but the shape of a soul. She wants to know why a being tied to embers can appear in a universe welded to worship and war. She asks for the Ashen One's origin as if naming it will contain it. She asks whether he understands chains, whether he can be bound or bargained with. Her voice has the authority of precedent. Empires listen to the Inquisition because it keeps the machine from eating itself. The Ashen One answers with the same honesty and sarcasm that has carried him through centuries. He cannot offer lineage that fits the Inquisition's charts. He speaks of bonfires and unmaking and the first flame as if those concepts should be self-evident, because they are. To eyes that have known only engines, his language is heresy and myth wrapped together. The Inquisitor does not dismiss him, she catalogues him. She measures his responses against a library of nightmares she has seen and labels she has learned. He becomes a file in a system that both fears and desires anomalies. Tests begin. They are as varied as they are invasive. Xenotech scans comb through bone and ash for signatures that align with known alien or warp contamination. Psychoprobes touch the edges of memory, waking snatches of past deaths and rebirths that the creature wears like a coat of dried blood. Nutrient assays and bloodwork search for enzymes that indicate warp taint. The fortress hums with machines that are designed to see into the soul the way a surgeon sees into organs. She instructs an interrogator specialist to lead the examination, an augment whose instruments blink with a pulse that matches the Ashen One's ember. He is watched closely as hydraulics and sanctified equipment touch his skin. During the testing, he stands still, not out of obedience but from habit. The Ashen One knows how to be observed. In his own history, scrutiny was often a prelude to combat or punishment. As the tests proceed, the Inquisitor watches for patterns. She looks for subtle signs. Does his eye flicker at certain prayers? Does his ember react to proximity to an icon? Does he flinch at holy iron or at demon products? Each response is weighed for implication. She is thinking not just of the present battle, but of the war to come. An asset must be predictable. An anomaly must be exploitable or contained. By the end of the first interrogation, the Inquisitor is more intrigued than satisfied. There are anomalies in his physiology that do not map neatly onto warp contamination. There are strengths that suggest a resistance to corruption, and behaviors that hint at a will difficult to bend. She files reports and makes quiet calls up the chain of command, each word chosen to shape the response to come. The Ashen One listens, feeling the net draw tighter and looser at once. Her final observation is a quiet one. She sees usefulness as a material thing and speaks of possibility and risk in the same breath. Keep him alive, she orders, if we can control him. Break him open and learn, the voices behind her ask. The Inquisitor smiles without warmth and offers a third route. Use him under constraints, make him a weapon with an invisible collar. He may hate the idea, but the cold eye reads correctly. Even in a universe that prizes obedience, The Ashen One knows the currency is power, and the Inquisition is offering a trade. He has been many things in many ages. He has been prisoner and exile, king and hunted animal. The Inquisitor has placed a new possibility before him: leverage. He can walk with chains, so long as the chains point toward his quarry. The Ashen One accepts the bargain in the only way he can. He nods and keeps his own terms quiet, for even a bonfire keeps its embers secret. The examinations dig deeper, not just into flesh but into memory. The fortress labs pull at the threads of the Ashen One's past with instruments that are part science, part sanctified ritual. They do not simply want to know what he is, they want to understand how he works. If they can model him, they can predict him. If they can predict him, they can use him. The Ashen One, for his part, remains cooperative enough to avoid immediate termination. Curiosity, after all, breeds opportunity. The data starts with scans, spectra that read like maps of weather rather than anatomy. The ash that composes much of his body shows patterns that are not purely biological. There are filaments that resonate at frequencies associated with stored memories, like a living palimpsest. Neural maps that would normally be chaotic after death show ordered pathways, as if some architecture of recollection has been grafted into his structure. It is unlike the neural ghosts the labs have recorded from psychers or from the deadened husks of warp-spliced soldiers. Psychoprobes reveal things that are both mundane and impossible. The Ashen One harbors memories of countless lives, yes, but those memories are not merely data. They are integrated into his sense of self, accessible and mutable. When the probes trace these threads, they find not the raw emotional signatures the Imperium expects from warp-tainted minds, but structured patterns that read more like recorded skill sets and cultural textures. He remembers not only the sensation of a teacher's hand, but also the exact motion, a sword parry, a forge blow, the cadence of a city's warning bells. Interrogators press further and find a remarkable truth. His fire feeds on souls and memories, not primarily on the raw psychic fuel of emotion that the warp drinks. When he consumes, he takes the essence of a life and folds it into his own matrix. The memory becomes fuel and instruction simultaneously. The process looks almost surgical in the lab graphics, threads of thought threaded into his ash like new wiring added to a machine. He gains skill and knowledge with each consumption, but he does not bleed raw emotion into the warp. That is the key observation. Technicians laugh nervously and scribble notes. Ganglia and eidetic storage within his tissues suggests a method of integration that is not demonic but parasitic in an alien sense, not a possession by foreign will, but an absorption and cataloging that preserves identity within him while allowing him to use its tools. The implication is dangerous and luminous. A being who eats memory can become a living archive of countless cultures and techniques, a weapon that does not merely destroy but learns. It is either the most useful thing the Imperium has ever found or the most dangerous. Further tests show that this method of feeding produces different byproducts than warp consumption. Where typical demons explode into contagion and psychic residue that attracts further corruption, the Ashen One's integration stabilizes the consumed essence, binding it internally. The labs tentatively propose that his extramental origin gives him an incompatibility with the warp's usual mechanisms. The Immaterium cannot easily make a map of him because his architecture is outside its grammar. That mismatch makes him less readable to the warp, and therefore less corruptible in the conventional sense. But it does not make him inert. Consuming demonescence still carries risk. Bits of warp lore leak back like rust on the integrated memories. The demon's rage, the echo of a god's hunger, pushes outward from time to time, a rusting of the edges. The Ashen One must practice restraint or risk becoming a conduit rather than a container. He has done this before with lesser predators, shaping a balance between consumption and control. The laboratory data confirms his claim. He is not immune to the warp. He is merely different in how he engages it. That difference rewires the Inquisition's calculus. A being who can ingest and stabilize warp taint could be used to close rifts, to consume demon principles, or to archive forbidden lore safely. It could also, conversely, become a weapon of unimaginable volatility if corrupted from within. The Inquisitor watches these results with a face like iron. Her mind counts benefits and risks as if tabulating supplies for a siege. When the Ashen One is told what the data suggests, he reacts with his usual half-smile and quiet honesty. He has always been a vessel, both for souls and for purpose. The discovery merely clarifies the terms. In a universe of gods that feed on war, he is an anomaly that eats gods, scraps, and makes them tools. Whether that will save or damn him is a calculation that the Imperium and the Ashen One will have to negotiate in the days that follow. The cathedral is a ruin of industry and faith, where altars have been replaced by rusted generators and pulpits by welded scaffolding. Scorched banners hang like liturgy to a dead world, and the air smells of old blood and burning oil. At its center, a rift yawns like a wound stitched with impossible light, and around the rift the cultists move with terrified reverence, chanting syllables that ripple through the air like a malicious tune. The chorus swells, and the fabric between worlds tears with a sound like metal crying. Something comes through. The demon that steps from the breach is not a simple creature of teeth and rage like those the Ashen One has handled before. It is a sculpture of malice, brass and muscle braided with flame, horns that shine with inscriptions written in the language of slaughter. Its skin is a map of battle, scarred by every war it has ever known. It smells of iron and ancient slaughter and the hunger of gods. Where lesser horrors sought only bodies, this one tastes strategy. The first clash is less a meeting than a test of grammar. The demon drives forward with axe and weight, a single-motion theology of violence, and the cathedral answers with a shockwave that bends light into jagged shapes. The Ashen One meets the axe with ember and iron. His blade is old language technique turned to new purpose. His ember is not merely pyre but pinion, small suns of ash that circle and strike with intent. He shifts and feints in rhythms learned beneath bonfires, and the demon counters with blows that tear stone and rend shadow. This is learning by pain. The Ashen One discovers that warp flame cleaves at his inner ballast and that the demon does not bleed in any way he recognizes. When his blade finds brass, there is no red, only the sound of a truth denied. The demon's wounds close not with time, but with invocation. The cult's chorus knits flesh back into worship. The Ashen One adapts. Where a bonfire might have been a steady anchor, here the ember must be used as a scalpel, a siphon, and a mirror. He slices into the demon's edges and then drinks the echo. Small, ruinous tastes are enough to learn the pattern of the beast's motion, the cadence of its attack, the way the axe arcs when the wielder plans to split rather than kill. Familiar and strange coexist in each exchange. He borrows the demon's fury into his own shadow, and then spits it back as ash wraiths that stalk the cultist's periphery. The familiars are not mere phantoms. They have teeth of memory and claws of learned technique. They tear at lesser worshippers and distract the demon long enough for the Ashen One to close ground, to place blade at tendon and ember at nerve. Each cut he makes is a lecture. Each ingestion of the demon's leftover essence is a lesson absorbed and filed. The demon roars with the noise of a world trying to be born wrong, yet every cry teaches the Ashen One to understand the warp's grammar. When he finally turns his full focus to the breach itself, the rift pushes back like a living argument. It resists closure by logic and by faith because this universe's gods are fed by the very attempt to prevent them. The Ashen One tries to sever the ritual at its source, and the demon meets the attempt with cunning. It seeks to drag him into the immaterium by force of will, to make his ember a fuel for its master. He withstands because his nature is a different calculus. He can consume fragments of demon essence and not collapse. Instead, he turns them into scaffolding for further resistance. The duel ends not with a final strike, but with an arrangement of consequences. The demon is wounded enough that it cannot maintain its full form and is forced back into the rift. The ritual collapses, the cultists falter, and the breach narrows to something that can be managed. The Ashen One does not gloat. He tastes the demon's residue, bitter, metallic, and saturated with eons of violence, and stores the memory inside the ash that makes him. This first true hunger of the 41st millennium teaches him the hard fact that the warp is not only chaos, it is an adversary that uses history and faith as weapons. He leaves the cathedral not unscathed but wiser. Here, one must fight gods as if they were beasts and learn their language fast, or else be eaten silently by worship. In the quiet that follows the cathedral's ruin, power speaks in small and terrible ways. The Inquisitor approaches not with blade but with ledger and condition. She has watched the Ashen One survive what should have ended him, seen the way he sips demon essence and remains whole, and the calculation in her mind turns like a gear. To the Imperium, utility is a currency more reliable than faith. To the Inquisition, an anomaly is either a resource or a hazard. The choice is never neutral. The bargain is simple in its cruelty. Serve the Imperium's needs, purge cults, close rifts, bring back evidence of what is seen and what remains, and in return the Inquisition will keep him from the autopsy and from the Grey Knight's insistent hands. They will provide passage, rations, and the curated freedom to hunt. Refuse and the machinery of power will take over, dissect, classify, and if useful, replicate or neutralize. The offer sits between threat and promise, edged by the knowledge that those who refuse seldom find second chances. He sits in a quiet room under surveillance and listens. That is how he has always made decisions, by watching the hands of power move and choosing whether to reap the advantage or to walk away. His life has been an accumulation of bargains, with hunters, with villains, with those who loved him enough to bind him. This one is no different in form, only in scale. To live as a free ember, he must accept custodianship, a leash that is both literal and doctrinal. The Inquisitor's terms are exacting. He will wear tracking wards. He will answer to inquisitorial command when rifts flare. He will submit to periodic scans and be denied certain freedoms that would tempt him into secrecy. He will not harm imperial citizens without explicit authorization. His autonomy is conditional and monitored. The leash is invisible but strong. It has led to lives saved and to lives ended. He knows the stories. Assets become liabilities when they accumulate power. Liabilities become subjects in coffers where the Inquisition stores things that bark and burn. Yet for the Ashen One, the bargain is also an opportunity. He came to this place seeking challenge and meaning in struggle. The Imperium offers both in abundance, cults to hunt, demons to taste, and battles that could teach him how to become something more than a wandering ember. The Inquisitor offers him, in effect, purpose in exchange for oversight. He weighs his options in the slow arithmetic of long experience, days alive against years of being dissected, nights of freedom against the certainty of orbital shackles. The calculation tips, not because of fear alone, but because the Imperium holds the map to the very things he craves, worthy opponents, cosmic threats, and the promise of fights that might end him finally. He accepts, though not without stipulations. He asks for sustenance that suits him, access to information about targets, and the promise that the Inquisition will point him to challenges worthy of his hunger. The Inquisitor grants the terms with the same clinical smile that closes deals. She keeps the option of violence latent in the agreement, defining boundaries and consequences that will be enforced without mercy if breached. In that moment, the Ashen One is neither prisoner nor free agent but a pact, a living weapon signed in ash and ink. The Inquisition has gained a blade that is hard to read, a creature that can eat demon essence and resist corruption. He has gained access to a universe's purpose for his appetite. Both sides walk away from the table containing a dangerous optimism. The Imperium thinks it can harness an anomaly, and he thinks he can use the Empire's hunger to feed his own. Both are right and both are wrong. Deals in this universe are walked out under shadow and power. They are tested by blood and by time. Containment is never simply a cell. In the Inquisition's hands, it is an apparatus of comprehension. He is led into a chamber ringed with sanctified machines and medical arrays that were like sanctums of reason. The walls are pocked with sigils that read to a machine mind as both warning and calibration. Here, the Ashen One is not merely observed, but unpacked. Instruments, servo arms, and a team of medici hover like a chorus of sterile priests, each motion precise and practiced. The xenobiologist assigned to him moves through this instrumentation with an expression that balances fascination and clinical fear. The tests are rigorous. They are designed to prod not just the body, but the way his ember interacts with the warp. They expose him to glyphs that sing of old deities, to sanctified iron blessed against demonhood, to simulated rifts that mimic the physics of a tear without the existential risk of a real breach. Each trial is logged, analyzed, and compared against catalogued cases the Imperium has long stored under secular oaths and high-security wards. They measure his regenerative rate under warp influence. They track neural echo shifts as he consumes fragments of taint. They test his response to Psyker's probes and to the presence of demon-etched relics. The medici map the ways in which his ash binds memory and how certain flavors of warp residue slow or accelerate that binding. Data appears on hollows as lines bending toward conclusions that never fully form. The Ashen One remains, outwardly, the same blunt instrument of will. Inwardly, he calibrates his responses, learning the edges of the machines that now measure him. Not all the results are reassuring. When given concentrated samples of demonescence in a controlled medium, his ember integrates them and stabilizes their psychic residue in ways that defy simple explanation. The xenobiologist records data that suggests a structural incompatibility between the Ashen One's architecture and the Immaterium's grammar. The warp cannot easily graft itself onto him. It can lash his boundaries, scar him with new motifs, but it frequently fails to claim ownership. The lab concludes that his extra-dimensional origin is the key. The Immaterium cannot map what it did not create. Yet anomalies register as risk. When they expose him to simulated rifts, his containment systems strain in ways that simple biology cannot explain. His body draws in warp energy and then expels it into shadow forms that are both beautiful and dangerous. The medici observe echoes of demon lore in his shadows, a phrase turned into a blade, a memory twisted into a wraith. The instruments whir with warnings. The integration process is stabilizing, but not without leak points. A demon fragment's anger, left unaddressed, will ripple outward and taint the vessel's edges. Observation is punctuated with human questions. The xenobiologist asks about motives, about hunger, about whether the Ashen One understands the consequences of consuming warp essence. He answers in ways that blend experience and blunt pragmatism. He is a consumer of memories and essences. He does what keeps him alive and makes meaning. He has been near monsters and survived, and he prefers to be fed targets rather than paraded as an exhibit. The lab notes record the straightforward refusal of being reduced to spectacle. Containment is not merely pharmacology, but also theater. The Inquisition stages the boundary between custody and care with a calculated politeness designed to keep him functional. They grant him blood rations and limited access to information, but they also install trackers and failsafe glyphs. The scent of the ward is antiseptic and iron, and under it hums the quiet decision the Inquisition must live with. Is he a weapon they can trust to aim, or a being whose growth will outstrip their control? As the trials conclude, the xenobiologist files a report that will be read in higher halls. It is cautious and precise. The Ashen One is dangerous, unstable, and promising. He is a paradox, an entity that might be used to close rifts and devour demons, yet one whose internal architecture could become a ruinous engine if corrupted. The containment holds for now. The medici recommend continued observation and measured deployment. The Inquisition smiles without warmth and prepares the ledger for the next operation. The Ashen One, for his part, leaves the lab with more knowledge than before, and with the awareness that even the machines of custody respect what they cannot entirely measure. They put him on a dropship and send him toward the cathedral before dawn. The mission is framed as straightforward: close the rift, cut the head of the cult, and extract. Simple words on a hollow, but the edges of the plan are sharpened by the Imperium's calculus: collateral minimized, strategic assets preserved, public order maintained. The Ashen One listens to the parameters and notes the trackers implanted under his skin. He straps on no ceremonial armor. His coat is his only shroud, and his boots no old songs of landing and impact. When he steps into the cathedral, it is worse than the report suggested. The architecture is industrial theology. Pulleys and gantries surround broken pews, and the altar is a lattice of generators feeding a central sigil. Around the rift, bodies are arranged like a harvest, faces bound in ecstatic rapture. The cultists move with grim precision. They do not need to be ordered. The lure of the breach has already taught them ritual that is both efficient and lethal. Their weapons are crude but coordinated. Their formations are meant to protect the ritualists and to bleed intruders. The Ashen One lands in a crater he carves himself by falling through a skylight with deliberate force. Impact throws up a cloud of ash that he uses to mask his initial approach. He does not rush to slaughter the rank and file. He surveys, shifts, and chooses. His strike is precise rather than theatrical: a breath, a cut, a shadow deployed where it will remove instrumented resistance. The familiars he releases are calibrated to cause confusion and to isolate the leaders. Ash wraiths slide through the ranks like smoke, biting at throats and collapsing formations. The rift is the true target. It breathes with colors that make the eyes ache. Where the cathedral's machinery once hummed in industrial rhythm, now the Imperium hums like a wound. The cultists chant ritual phrases that tether the breach to the mortal plane, and each chant tightens the rift's hold. The Ashen One strikes at the ritualists closest to that center, severing priests and burning altars with concentrated ember. He does not waste effort on crowdless slaughter unless necessary. The Imperium is explicit about minimizing collateral when possible. The Inquisitor listens for reports with a hands-on interest. He knows she watches not just for success, but for how he manages harm. Combat here feels different. The cultists are not uniform enemies. Many are broken individuals seeking meaning through sacrifice and violence. The Ashen One sees faces blurred with grief, fury, and fanaticism. He does not close his blade on their throats out of some misplaced compassion, but because strategy benefits from precision. The leaders are not merely human either. Several are priests seamed with minor warp blessings, psychers who can weave small tears in the air. These are the dangerous ones. He focuses on them, cutting the ritual's sinews first. When the breach's guardians are neutralized, closing the rift becomes an act of consumption. He draws the ember into a shape that allows him to pry at the tear's edges and to drink a sliver of the Imperium's pressure. The sensation is brutal, like swallowing a storm, and it tests the limits established in the Medikey. The cultists wail as the source of their promised salvation is choked. Bodies collapse. The generators that fed the sigil die with a sputter of light. Extraction comes with the taste of acrid victory. The Inquisitor's response is prompt. Valkyrie lifts slice the sky, and support arrives to secure the perimeter. He hands over fragments of evidence and leaves the cathedral with ash in his hair and a new ache in his bones. His trackers ping back onboard to the fortress, where Medikey will analyze the warp fluids. But the mission is a success by the Imperium's ledger. The rift is sealed, cult devastated, collateral contained within an acceptable margin. The Ashen One walks away less whole in places and more whole in others. He carried back new memories, new flavors of demon echo, and a pragmatic lesson about the cost of mercy in this universe. The cathedral's ruin taught him that fights here require not only blade and hunger, but a surgical mind that can separate the feed from the faith. He is not merely a destroyer in the questions of the Inquisition, but also an instrument that can be tuned. He has begun learning the price of that tuning. The first fights sharpened him, the next trials refine and escalate. Under pressure, his ember does not simply glow, it evolves. The Ashen One discovers layer after layer of usable fire within himself, a hierarchy of manifestation that moves from ember to blazing will. Each stage is costly and exacting, demanding not only blood but focus, memory, and sacrifice. Ember is the baseline, the small, efficient flame that draws on recent memories and minor essences. It is what he used at the cathedral to cut ritual cords and to kindle shadow wraiths that skitter through the enemy ranks. Ember is precise and quiet, useful for infiltration and surgical attacks. It does not change him much. It is a tool that conserves energy and attention. When confronted with sustained violence, he ascends. Flame is the second state, hotter, louder, less forgiving. It burns not only what is before it, but also burns through uncertainty, consolidating scattered memories into coherent strength. In Flame, his blade sings with new keenness. The familiars are no longer mere echoes, but small, semi-autonomous entities, ash hounds that hunt with a near-animal cunning and wraiths that can parry blows meant for him. Flame consumes more of his reserves and demands mental order. It refines instincts into choreography. When the stakes rise toward existential threats, rifts growing into yawning maws, demon captains hardened by worship, he unlocks a rarer transformation, the Phoenix state. Phoenix is not merely greater fire, it is a redefinition of being. In this stage, the Ashen One becomes larger than his body, a locus around which shadow and flame take new form. His coat pulses like living material. His eyes burn not with a single color, but with the warped spectrum of both ember and immaterium. The familiars become legion, great ash beasts that fight with skill patterns learned from the souls he carries, spectral phalanxes that move with the tactical memory of thousands of soldiers. Each ascent takes tolls. Ember costs stamina, flame fractures sleep and memory, Phoenix risks integration with the warp in ways that must be carefully controlled. The Ashen One learns to ration and to plan as if his self were a war chest. Deploying Phoenix to solve a single conflict might seal a breach, but could leave him vulnerable for days. He records these costs in the ledger of his mind, counting them like trophies and warnings. The new powers also change how he thinks and moves. Where once he relied on blade and personal cunning, he now commands small ecosystems of ash constructs. He can send out an ash hunt to track a warp signature, let a wraith infiltrate a temple and shred an altar's sigils with memory bite, or hold an entire corridor with spectral sentinels while he consumes a rift's edge. His tactics become layered and strategic, a main assault softened by misdirection, then cleaned by familiars that harvest corruption instead of merely destroying bodies. Training and experience mean that each stage is not merely a power-up but a new language. Embers taught him to listen, Flame taught him to answer, Phoenix taught him to speak in terms the warp understands, and then to twist those terms back upon the gods. The unkindled learns to be both army and archivist. He can gather combat knowledge from fallen enemies and use it instantly through his familiars and shadow constructs. But perhaps the most dangerous lesson is that consuming power changes appetite. Each absorption sharpens his ability to integrate more. The Ashen One must guard against hubris. The Phoenix state is intoxicating. The Immaterium's colors sing to him with the promise of final victories. He must build prisons within himself, small rooms of memory and law where powerful essences can be stored without corrupting his core. These containers are not instinctual. They are learned disciplines he carves into his being like sigils. In the web of battles ahead, his unkindled power becomes a complex toolset. Choose Ember for stealth, Flame for conflict, and Phoenix for the rare and terrible occasions when only a god's hunger stands between him and the purpose he seeks. The Inquisition watches as he adapts, both alarmed and impressed. Allies and enemies will soon learn that the Ashen One is not merely another hunter of the warp. He is a new kind of weapon, one that eats gods and learns their songs. But with that capability comes responsibility and risk. Each feast alters the menu, and the 41st Millennium does not forgive culinary mistakes. After repeated confrontations, the Ashen One begins to understand the Imperium not as a single monolithic hunger, but as a tapestry of tastes and textures. Each demon is woven from a particular strain of worship and violence, and each rift coughs up a different flavor of chaos. He discovers that his appetite is not indiscriminate. Small fragments of demonescence can be taken like spoonfuls of a bitter broth. They sting, they scar, but they strengthen him in precise ways. He learns to sample, not swallow, to extract the kernel of motion and memory from a demon without letting the demon's fanatical self pour back into him unfiltered. The process is clinical at first. He opens himself like a well-practiced butcher, exposing shadow and ash in controlled measures. He lets a fragment of rage pass his teeth and feels the demon's combat instinct slide into his marrow like an implanted graft. A slash pattern becomes available in his hand that was not there a breath before. A demon's cunning becomes a mapping of battlefield lines and choke points he can sense without thought. Importantly, emotion as the warp drinks it, the raw, polyphonic scream of worship that fuels gods, does not take root in him the way it does in psychers or corrupted mortals. He borrows the instrumentality and leaves behind the worship. That distinction matters in a universe where faith itself is a currency. To the Immaterium, emotions are tinder. It expects to fan screams into conflagrations that feed powers beyond counting. The Ashen One resists that pattern because his mechanism is different. He does not feed on faith in general, but on the acts that faith produces, the memory of a battle, the sensation of the crack of a bone, the taste of victory or desperation. Those moments, peeled of their devotional overlay, are useful tools. He can stitch a demon's combat memory into his repertoire without importing the demon's theological imperatives. Learning is painful and iterative. Each ingestion leaves a bruise on his inner architecture. Sometimes the demonic fragment fights back, a muscle memory that wants to assert its own narrative. He has to build internal wards, small rooms of ash where a borrowed trait can be kept alive but quarantined, like a specimen stored in chilled amber. The more he devours, the more elaborate his internal taxonomy becomes. He catalogs sensations as instruments rather than as gods, a blade technique, a siege tactic, a cry pattern that indicates where to aim to break morale. The familiar becomes tool, and the tool becomes memory. There are moral complications. He takes fragments from beings that had once been driven by worship, and those fragments carry echoes. Sometimes in the quiet after battle, he hears a ghost chorus of the devotions he has sampled. The sound is not worship to him, but it can unsettle civil populations who mistake the residue for omen. He manages this by compartmentalizing, by building those inner rooms with locked doors fashioned out of discipline and the old loneliness that served him for centuries. He is careful not to let the borrowed rage become an instruction set that overrides his own will. That is the line between eating and being eaten. Practically, these borrowings change how he fights. Where once his strikes were improvisations, now they are augmented by foreign patterning. He moves with a tangential knowledge of corruption. He can anticipate how a warp-tainted brigade will rotate its formations, predict the siren-like call that draws cultists into coordinated frenzy, and slip into the rhythm of a demon's assault before the demon finishes its thought. His familiars, fed with fragments, emulate maneuvers that once belonged to 100 fallen captains. They become trainers and soldiers in miniature, carrying within them the tactics of those who worshipped violence for millennia. This method is not without danger. Each fragment increases his capacity to interact with the warp, and therefore increases the attention he draws. Gods and demon princes notice when their children are taken and catalogued. The more he borrows, the more interested higher powers become in a creature that can strip their servants of essence and make weapons of their memories. Yet the alternative is to shy away and become a curiosity instead of an engine. He chooses to keep tasting, measuring each fragment, and to practice a hard discipline of containment. That discipline becomes another weapon. So he marches forward into a galaxy of worship and war, collecting instruments of violence and making them his. He learns the warp not by succumbing to it, but by turning its outputs into fuel. Borrowed hate sharpens him without making him a worshipper. Each small taste is a lesson learned and catalogued, and with those lessons comes efficiency, cunning, and a name that the Inquisition will someday write down as both miracle and threat. The intelligence grid pings a stronger signature than the usual cult cell. This time the report includes an armored silhouette with centuries of battle markings, heraldry corrupted with brass and chain, and the unmistakable scent of dedicated worship. The Ashen One is briefed and told that a Chaos champion has consolidated a network in the abandoned Manufactorum district, turning a warehouse into a temple of slaughter. He lands without fanfare, slipping through rusted vents and down into a world where devotions are measured in blood and banners carry teeth. The champion is no mere zealot. He is a veteran of 10 millennia, a living knot of ritual and rage, his armor grafted to bone and tattooed with ruinous sigils. He moves with the easy confidence of someone who has translated slaughter into liturgy and has been rewarded by powers that keep score. The warehouse thrums with the precision of an army rehearsed for slaughter. Fire teams, assault squads, and ritualists orbit the champion like satellites of doom. The Ashen One has faced chaos before, but this is a different game. This enemy is seasoned by centuries of sanctioned violence, and the champion's reflexes are instilled by a religion of battle. The first contact is brutal. The champion charges with the kind of momentum that makes the floor tremble. Chainaxe meets ember forged blade, and sparks fly like small suns. The Ashen One moves at angles that render the champion momentarily indecisive. He borrows a piece of the champion's own muscle memory mid-fight, a fragment of a counterstrike executed in a different war, a combination that had felled a titan decades ago, and uses it to redirect a swing. The tactic works and opens the champion's armor at a seam, but the cost is instantaneous. The champion's rage flares, and the warehouse becomes a pyre of fury. This is not just a test of technique, but of mental durability. The champion's presence carries a pressure that makes thoughts hard to hold steady, as if the air itself leans toward violence. The Ashen One resists by drawing on his inner compartments, isolating the borrowed patterns to prevent them from translating into blind devotion. He uses the fragments as tools, to predict the champion's favored angles, to sense the rhythm of his breath, to anticipate when the weapon will seek to cleave rather than to parry. Each success is paid for with pain, for the champion's strikes are meant to unmake not only flesh but the continuity of self. Allied cultists flood the gaps the champion opens. They are not mindless. They move with the practiced coordination of seasoned soldiers. The familiars the Ashen One summons, ashhounds and wraiths given tactical instruction from consumed fragments, disrupt formations and harvest corrupted relics. The fight spreads through the warehouse like a contagion of violence. Shelving and crates become cover and trap, a maze where both predator and champion trade lessons and wounds. At a critical juncture, the champion attempts an invocation, a short ritual that infuses his weapon with a temporary, corrosive blessing. For a moment, his swings refuse normal deflection. The Ashen One counters by consuming a concentrated shard of demon memory he had stored earlier, converting its tactical detail into a shield for his shadow forms. It works, but the cost is steep. The shard's residue rubs against his own soul architecture and leaves a thin, persistent rust. He binds it into a new interior vault, a lesson learned and a scar marked. The end is not simple. The champion falls after a sequence of maneuvers where the Ashen One exploits a ritualic pause, stepping through an opening in the champion's cadence and delivering a decisive blow at a joint revealed only by borrowed knowledge. The warehouse goes quiet, but the victory is Pyrrhic. The Ashen One has grown stronger, yes, but so too has the interest of powers above him. Word of a creature who can defeat a veteran champion spreads outward on the warp winds like an odor. The Imperium celebrates the kill as tactical success, but elsewhere those who worship violence note an affront to their ledger. The Ashen One has proven his method, but the scale of enemies hunting him has grown. Each triumph buys him a price paid later in attention and in the appetite of gods. Rifts are notoriously stubborn. They do not exist like holes in fabric, but like arguments in logic. They demand responses that conform to a grammar the unwary cannot parse. On a mid-hive district, an especially volatile tier blooms faster than orbital doctrine allows to be contained. The Inquisitor authorizes an orbital strike that will sterilize a wide radius and kill billions if necessary. The Ashen One hears the countdown and recognizes the calculus, sacrifice to prevent spread. He refuses the nuclear morality, not out of compassion alone, but from a hunger to test a hypothesis that has been growing in him since the cathedral ingestion. He proposes an alternative no line of command expected. Let him try to swallow the rift. Approaching the breach is like approaching a living mouth. The colors burn and push. The air around it roils with hunger. Cultists are already falling in wretched hopes of becoming anchors for the tier. The Ashen One sets himself down at the rim like a man at a well, and concentrates such that his ember becomes a funnel. He extends shadow tendrils into the Imperium and begins to feed. The rift resists like a leviathan drawing in its prey. It surges with a pressure that tears at thoughts and burns memories to charcoal. His inner rooms clang. Older souls he carries scream as the warp washes across them. The act is annihilation risk personified. The Immaterium pushes back, trying to rewrite his internal script and flood his containers. He loses tens of thousands of memory fragments as the raw pressure incinerates delicate lattices inside him. The pain is not merely physical. It is the sensation of being unwound in 10,000 contradictory directions at once. He feels shards of himself dropping away like ash from a torch. Each fragment lost is a cost in knowledge and identity. But the feedback is also a weapon. The more the rift gives, the more he can swallow and repurpose. The Immaterium's energy, when correctly channeled, becomes a scaffolding for his shadow architecture. The rift begins to shrink. At first it contracts in spasms and then more steadily as he pulls more of the warp into himself. The demons on the other side scream and claw at the veil. Their voices press against the edges of his private rooms, trying to pry them open. The more he devours, the greater the attention he draws. For a moment the world tilts. He almost loses the integrity of his anchors. The Inquisitor's voice on the Vox registers fear. Orbital codes tick. The strike can still be authorized if he fails. He keeps feeding. When the rift finally slits and collapses, the relief is not triumphant but exhausted. He staggers back, his form smoking with energies not meant for a single mortal shell. He has scar tissue inside that hums like a forbidden engine. He saved lives by refusing exterminatus, but he also took inside him a volume of immaterium that will require time, blood, and will to integrate. That act proves a possibility. Rifts can be swallowed. It also proves a warning. Swallowing a rift is a wager with godlike forces, and even victory reshapes the eater. In the hours and days that follow, Medici chart his internal damage. Inquisitorial ears pick up the notes of alarm, and the wider Imperium changes the way it talks about him. Some whisper of miracle, others whisper of blasphemy. But the Ashen One understands more practically that he has altered his odds and the calculus of those who would use him. He can close tiers without annihilation, but each act raises the stakes and his visibility. The universe takes note when a creature refracts a god's hunger into a private flame and comes out alive. News travels differently in a galaxy sustained by faith and bureaucracy. The Ashen One's exploits do not remain local gossip. They ascend in reports, vox chatter, and coded transmissions that slip past filters because they are too exceptional to ignore. A demon prince consumed, a rift swallowed, a champion felled, such things read like both victory and heresy on the same page. The Inquisition writes assessments with careful language, while the Grey Knights and other demon-hunting orders react with blunt alarm. The question at the heart of their argument is simple and harsh. Is he a weapon to be controlled, or a blasphemy to be destroyed before he consumes too much? Grey Knights send formal demands. Their doctrine is zero tolerance where demon taint is involved. To their minds, the Ashen One is a walking unknown and a potential vector for the very thing they exist to eradicate. They argue that no entity that integrates war peasants should remain unsealed in the field, and that the safest course is containment on Titan, where sanctified vaults and mind forges can dissect, and if needed, neutralize him. The language is not negotiation. It is an order writ with the weight of a specialized breed that believes absolutes matter more than nuance. Across the bureaucracy, voices rise in counterpoint. Some within the Inquisition, including the Ashen One's patroning Inquisitor, argue for controlled deployment. They highlight utility. A being that can eat rifts is invaluable when exterminatus is humanly unacceptable or strategically ruinous. If he can be directed, monitored, and constrained by implants and overseers, his rare ability could save entire worlds while preserving the Empire's manpower. The debate becomes a chess game of precedent, politics, and fear. Political levers move. Requests are filed, vetoes considered, and distant authorities weigh in with priorities that have nothing to do with the immediate cost in lives on a single planet. The Grey Knights' demand is not a mere tactical request, it is a moral fulcrum. If the Imperium yields to them, it sends a message that preservation of doctrinal purity outranks tactical innovation. If the Imperium resists, it risks angering a specialized force whose wrath can be politically decisive. The Ashen One watches from the fortress with a strange detachment. To him, the debate is logic applied to danger. He has no loyalty to doctrine beyond the pragmatic terms he struck. He records the moves and considers contingencies. He knows that if the Grey Knights win, he will be dissected, his private rooms pried open, and the essences he contains catalogued or destroyed. He knows that if the Inquisition wins, he will be used and perhaps pushed to the limits of utility until he becomes a hazard. Either outcome reduces his autonomy, which he values like a final ember. Meanwhile, rumors cause ripples in the warp. Gods taste attention and taste anger. Some powers tilt their gaze with the personal curiosity of predators observing a new rival. To other factions and Xenos, a new instrument has been revealed. The Ashen One becomes a node in a network of appetites, each ledger marking his name with interest or threat. He is no longer a local oddity. He is a variable in a galaxy-wide equation. The political heat fosters practical consequences. Patrols adjust their routing. Grey Knights' representatives arrive with sealed warrants. The Inquisitor tightens his leash while advocating for further missions that justify keeping him active. Each mission is now a twofold test: tactical value and political argument. The Ashen One accepts these missions because they let him fight and learn, and because every successful mission alters the calculus just enough to keep him in the field a little longer. In the end, attention from above changes the terms of his existence. No longer merely hunting for challenge, he must navigate courtly danger, doctrinal armistice, and the chilling possibility that the next order might be his end. The 41st Millennium does not tolerate anomalies lightly, but it also cannot afford to waste tools that might bend the war in its favor. The Ashen One occupies that narrow seam between utility and abomination, and the higher powers watch to see if he will become a weapon they can wield or a god they must despise. The intelligence network flags a location that tastes old and terrible on the warp sensors, an ancient processing plant converted into a cathedral of brass and bone. The signature is not just strong, it is structured, like a hymn written with the intent to call attention. At its center sits a throne of melted weapons and trophies, and upon that throne reclines Thraskull, an ascended champion whose victories are stitched into the very warp grids of the sector. He is a demon prince in the raw sense, not merely a powerful demon, but a creature elevated by the ritualized worship of war, a being who has been fed by centuries of confirmed slaughter. The Inquisitor decides to test her gamble and selects the Ashen One for the mission. He will enter alone at first, a wedge that must pry open the prince's defenses just enough for a decisive strike. Sending an entire strike force would only amplify the ritual's appetite. Stealth and unpredictability are necessary. The fortress outfits him with the minimal supports he demands: blood rations, data on ceremonial timings, and a single contingency Valkyrie on standby for extraction. He penetrates the complex like smoke. The processing plant is a maze of piping and conduits, each corridor lined with relics that hum with recorded violence. The air tastes of brass and old blood. Cultists and traitor marines patrol in disciplined waves, their rituals synchronized to maintain the prince's feed. The throne room sits beyond a gauntlet of lesser champions and mechanical defenses. At first glance, it looks ceremonial, a macabre palace. Up close, it radiates a pressure that is almost physical, the sense that the prince's will wraps around the room like a net. Thraskell is enormous and deliberate. He is crowned with horns etched with names of conquered worlds and carries an axe that reads like a litany. His presence is not merely power but history made physical. He is a slow-acting contagion of war. Around him stand his elite guard, world eaters who have been grafted with demon forges and ritual scars. They move with a precision seasoned by millennia, and they flank the throne like living parapets. The Ashen One understands that killing Thraskell conventionally is improbable. The prince regenerates in ways that defy common weapons. Rituals will knit shattered pieces back into flesh. The only path is to strike the prince's essence itself, to do what he has been training to do, to consume and contain. He approaches with rituals of his own, burning wards into the air, summoning familiars that will distract and harvest leftover ritual energies. He times his approach to the prince's ceremonial lull, the brief window where the feed is least concentrated. When he reveals himself, the throne room erupts in both violence and ceremony. Thraskell laughs with a sound that shakes dust from the rafters and names him with a contempt that echoes like a prayer. The world eaters surge, and a dozen veteran warriors converge like a closing flower. The Ashen One releases his shadows, now tempered with the tactical memories of previous devourings. They fight with ferocity and with the cunning of 1,000 practiced drills. He carves through the guard, but the prince's presence warps the geometry of the fight. Even wounds that would fell a lesser demon heal and knit with invocational speed. At the heart of the battle, the Ashen One acts not as a mere attacker, but as an anatomy student of the warp. He plucks threads of ritual energy and devours them, shaping them into internal scaffolding. He moves toward Thraskell not to slaughter, but to reach and to ingest. The prince feels itself being consumed, and with that feeling comes something worse than rage: confusion. Gods do not expect to be eaten by monsters of other origin. The prince lashes out with the full measure of its accumulated violence, and the Ashen One meets it with a final, monstrous act. He locks the prince's essence into a newly forged inner cell, using techniques learned from consuming smaller demons and entire rifts. It is delicate and apocalyptic at once. The effect is cataclysmic. The throne room shudders, the world eaters are unmade in a cascade of interior collapses, and the prince's scream echoes outward in the warp like the sound a planet makes when broken. For a moment, the Ashen One is a conduit for enormous power, and he feels the pressure of having a god inside him. He secures the prison with metaphors of ash and law he has learned to speak. The prince is contained, but the cost is great. He is nearly undone by the sheer volume of essence. His inner rooms strain, but they hold. When he finally staggers out of the throne room, the plant quiets into a ruin. The Inquisitor's forces extract him amid a hush that is more reverent than fearful. The mission is both triumph and warning. A demon prince can be consumed, but consuming it will change the eater forever. The Ashen One has succeeded in a way that rewrites the ledger of possibility across stations and palaces. He carries within him now the memory and energy of an ascended champion, a cache of experience and power that will alter both his capabilities and the way the galaxy regards him. The battle with the demon prince becomes something beyond combat, beyond ritual, beyond even the cruel logic of the warp. It becomes a collision of identities, one born from flame, one forged from worship. Thraskell, the exalted butcher of 100 worlds, crashes against the Ashen One like a tidal wave made of bone, brass, and immortal hatred. Every strike the prince delivers carries the weight of centuries of fanatic battles, and every counter from the Ashen One is carved from centuries of stubborn survival. The clash shakes the ancient processing plant to its foundations. Walls scream under the pressure of warp tides. Machinery folds into impossible shapes as the prince bends reality to his will. The Ashen One feels the environment trying to rewrite him, as though existence itself rejects his presence and wants him dissolved back into ash. But he keeps moving, keeps carving, keeps resisting with flame that burns quietly but refuses to die. Then comes the moment, the one he has been preparing for, the one every fragment he ever consumed has been leading him toward. The prince lunges in a final, all-consuming blow, its form swelling with divine rage. Instead of retreating, the Ashen One steps into the strike, not against it but with it, riding its momentum like a current. His inner doors open, his ember flares, and he inhales not air but essence. He swallows the prince. It is not elegant, it is not triumphant, it is agony. The demon prince is not a simple demon. It is a kingdom of memories, a cathedral of rage, a labyrinth of victories and screams. When it enters him, it enters all at once. His inner rooms shake and splinter. Souls he carries shriek as they collide with something older and louder. The prince tries to break him open from the inside, tries to devour him in turn, tries to assert dominance with the certainty of a creature worshipped for millennia. For a moment, he truly begins to unravel. His form flickers, his shadow stutters, his memories, both borrowed and his own, begin to mix in ways they never should. He feels the edges of himself dissolving as if he were being erased from history. But his ember does not go out. It roars. From that ember rises a structure he did not know he could make, a vessel of ash, flame, and unkindled will, a prison forged not from runes or steel but from identity. He binds Thraskell piece by piece, building walls around the prince's essence with the patience of a blacksmith and the fury of a dying star. The demon prince screams as it is contained. The building collapses around them. Reality snaps back into place, and the Ashen One stands as a living furnace containing the soul of a god. The Ashen One emerges from the ruin like a figure stepping out of a dying sun. His armor glows faintly with heat that has no source. His eyes simmer with the light of collapsing stars, not bright, but heavy, like they carry weight. His shadow behaves unnaturally, stretching ahead of him as if pulled by invisible tides, shifting with memories that are not fully his. The world around him feels smaller now, as though his senses have expanded into every crack and corner of the warp. But the most profound change is internal. He can feel the prince inside him, bound but awake, a caged storm, a cathedral of fury trapped behind doors he forged with pain and instinct. It whispers sometimes, not in words but in impressions, the memory of battles he never fought, landscapes he never walked, victories he never earned. Its presence is not welcome, but it is not corruption. It is architecture, it is weight, it is fuel. When he returns to the Inquisition, no one speaks immediately. Soldiers step back as though witnessing a new kind of weapon. Psychers avert their eyes, terrified of the paradox his soul has become. Even the Space Marines hesitate, sensing a pressure that reminds them uncomfortably of their primarchs, yet twisted in a direction they cannot categorize. The Inquisitor, cold, calculating, unshaken, stares at him the longest. She knows what he is now, not a psyker, not a demon, not a man. A container. A vault of power stolen from gods. A walking archive of blasphemous strength. dangerous beyond measure, precious beyond calculation. She orders new protocols, not for containment but for deployment. She speaks with a voice that is both wary and resolute, acknowledging what the Imperium rarely admits. Some threats require tools that cannot be controlled, only guided, and some enemies can only be met by something equally monstrous. The Ashen One listens, silent and still. He feels the weight of the prince testing his inner walls. He feels his ember tightening them. He is changed, yes, but he is not broken. His will remains his own, sharpened by flame and centuries of persistence. He does not bow. He does not rebel. He simply stands, ash drifting from him like falling snow, ready for whatever comes next. The galaxy does not rest, even as the Inquisition debates his fate and the Grey Knights whisper execution rites. New threats rise across 1,000,000 worlds. Warp storms churn with hunger. Demon princes reorganize their legions. Alien empires plot in shadow. Humanity bleeds in 1,000 wars and begs for impossible salvation. In this storm of need, the Inquisitor makes her decision. She releases the Ashen One, not freely, never freely, but under terms forged in balancing fear against necessity. He will operate under strict directives. He will avoid imperial blood unless authorized. He will answer summons when called. He will allow observation, though not leash nor chain. A weapon, when said, a blasphemy too useful to destroy. He accepts not from loyalty or duty, but because the galaxy offers something his old world never could: endless challenge, endless flame to chase, endless monsters to hunt, each one older, crueler, or stronger than the last. His hunger is not for blood or glory, but for meaning, found only in the struggle against something that might finally be able to kill him. As he departs the fortress, a quiet wind blows through the lower hive. Ash trails behind him like a comet tail, carried by burning purpose. He senses rifts across distant stars. Demons whisper his name with fear for the first time. Cults write warnings in blood. Space Marines sharpen their weapons, unsure if they will someday fight beside him or against him. He does not care. The road is open. The hunt is eternal. In a galaxy where gods thrive on worship and war never ends, a lone ember walks forward, not to save the world, not to doom it, but to test himself, to burn paths no mortal or demon has ever walked. And in the quiet moments before the next battle, he feels the prince rage inside him, powerless against the prison he forged. His ember warms, bright and resolute. Not corrupted, not controlled, unkindled. He steps into the darkness with purpose. For the first time in ages, the Ashen One feels alive. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark Millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.